Ladies and gentlemen, it is your host Johnny back again with another video. And hey, look, I just got off work. I got this fashionable collar shirt on right here, if y'all can see. I just got off. But what I want to talk about on today's video is the upcoming July 29th bout between Terence Crawford and my man Errol Spence Jr. from right here in Dallas, Texas. And I wanted to, cover the fight, talk, give my prediction of who I think is going to win, look into some of their boxing stats, to try to get some analysis and some breakdown, and, talk about their different fighting styles and things of that nature, and who I believe is actually going to win. But before I get started with the video, again, if you're enjoying the content you're listening to here, please, for me, like the video, subscribe to the page, hit that notification bell so anytime a new video gets downloaded, you'll be alerted. But without further ado, let's dive into this fight because I believe this right here is definitely the fight of the year. Heck, I could probably say, it's the fight of the last 2 or 3 years, to be honest with everybody, in my opinion. But this is a marquee matchup. Boxing fans have been waiting and clamoring to get these two boxers in the ring relatively in their prime. We didn't want them to do a Mayweather-Pacquiao where really both of them were past their prime at that point. These two guys, Terence and Errol, were kind of still right in the middle of the prime. Terence Crawford may be a little, to the back half of his prime, if you will. And then Errol Spence, you think he would be in the middle of his prime considering his age, but he did have that horrific car accident, unfortunately, and we just don't know how that's going to, play with his, body and maybe hinder some of his prime and cut it short, if you will. But first, let me talk about Terence Crawford, and then, I'll bounce over to Errol Spence Jr. So let's look at some of Terence Crawford's stats here. So as we can see, Terence Crawford has had 39 fights. He's undefeated, of course. No losses, no draws. He's has 30 TKOs to his name, or knockouts, if you will. So Terence Crawford is about getting folks up out of there. When you look at his overall stats from a knockout standpoint, he's 75.7% of knockouts when you look at TKOs and KOs, if you will. His estimated power, now just for anybody who doesn't know, which by the way, these stats for anybody who may be interested is actually off of boxstats.com. They're a fantastic site when it comes to trying to look up boxing stats for any present boxer or any boxer in the past if you just want to look up some stats. So you look, if you're interested in that sort of thing, you could definitely utilize them. But estimated power essentially talks about of the power shots that Terence Crawford, throws. It kind of takes into account how many does he throw when he fights, how many lands, things of that nature. Same thing with estimated chin to body ratio. How many of those shots are landing on the opponent's chin or to the body, which, is pretty cool. So that's what those stats mean. When you look at, again, round by round knockout percentage, 13.4% isn't bad. He's had about 208 rounds in total boxed. And then, again, 28 opponents by stoppage means basically waving the right towel or whatever. And then if you say like, why you just said he had 30, what's the other two? Well, again, the other two came by way of came by KO, just flat out. He out of there, not a throwing in the towel or ref stoppage or anything like that. So Terence Crawford putting up pretty good numbers. When you look at some of the opponents that Terence Crawford has fought, and you look at their particular stats, his opponents, again, 919, total fights between all of them. They have a 59.6% estimated power advantage, 63.1% punch resistance, meaning, when his opponents were hit, how much damage did they sustain, show, that sort of thing. That's what those stats mean from Terence Crawford. So, again, Terence Crawford is a guy, He may be known as a counter puncher to some, or well, not a defensive fighter, but somebody who, if you take the fight to him, he's going to be waiting on you. He's going to counter your shots, things of that nature. And Terence Crawford is really good at that. The TKOs and the KOs lets me know he's also a guy. And if you watch Terence Crawford fight, even though he is known as a counter puncher, he can take the fight to you. I mean, he's done it on numerous occasions with a couple of his opponents. So don't be fooled to think that Terence Crawford can hang back and just going to wait for you to come to him. No, he'll bring the fight to you. But before I dive more into that, let's look at Errol Spence Jr. and some of his particular metrics and talk about him as a fighter. So when we look at Errol Spence, he is, again, undefeated himself, 28 wins, 0 losses. Again, no draws. He, out of his 28 fights, Errol Spence has knocked out 22 of those opponents, which is pretty, almost in total, so pretty impressive from that standpoint. When you look at his stats, again, 77.8% knockout rate, 81% on estimated power, and 77% estimated chin to body. Again, when you contrast how many knockouts Errol Spence has actually had compared to the fights, his percentages obviously are going to be higher than Terence Crawford. So just for anybody who maybe wonder why those percentages are higher, he does it at a more effective clip, which actually makes sense compared to Errol boxing style, since Errol is known as more of an aggressive fighter versus Terence Crawford, who is a counter puncher. But when you look at Errol Spence Jr.'s opponents, again, not too far away from what Terence Crawford opponents are. Again, he hasn't had as many fights, so clearly, the fight count total is going to be lower. But when you look at the estimated power average, 56.7% and then 60.7%. And when you contrast that to, where Terence Crawford's opponents are, it's pretty comparable, to be honest with you. I mean, they're not too terribly far apart. I mean, Terence Crawford's opponents had a little bit higher, about 3% higher on the power average and about 3% higher on the punch resistance. Again, though, in my opinion, I just think that's because he's had more fights under his belt than Errol Spence has currently at this point. I mean, they've fought some of the same opponents. I mean, they both fought, people like Sean Porter, Danny Garcia. I mean, they fought in a lot of the same opponents because, again, they are in the welterweight division. And, you're going to end up fighting a lot of the same opponents when you do that. Now, with that being said, I've talked about their two different, boxing styles, right? Where Terence Crawford, even though, again, he can bring the fight to you. Again, we saw that in his fight with Sean Porter, for example. He's more of a counter puncher. He's waiting for you to bring the fight to him so that way he can, methodically, get inside you and basically punish you upstairs and to the body, to that standpoint. And then when we look at Errol Spence, again, is more of the aggressive fighter. He's going to look to push the pace, push the tempo, things of that nature. Now, here's what I will say. Because of that, and we know styles make fights, right? For anybody who has watched boxing or any style of fighting, really, even if it's mixed martial arts, right? Styles make fights. And even though Errol Spence is a bigger fighter than Terence Crawford, he has a reach advantage. It's not like a significant reach advantage, but it is good enough for, Errol Spence, if he wants to, which he should, in my opinion, is to keep that jab off there, right? To keep Terence Crawford, off of him. And anybody who's maybe taken boxing before or, been in any type of fight or just, a fan of boxing in general knows when you have reach, the goal with your reach is to keep your opponent at bay. And so stick that jab off there, right? and then, and then throw a couple of combos in there also to kind of throw him off, because you don't want to continue to throw your jab out there, because an experienced fighter who's really technically sound like Terence Crawford can be sitting and waiting on that, to slip in, hit you with a body shot, even like an overhand, things of that nature. But I still think, though, that Errol Spence still has to utilize that, though, to try to keep Terence Crawford at bay, and, to set him up for some of his other combinations that he can and will throw during this fight. So I think, in my opinion, that's how Errol Spence can actually win this fight. When you look at Terence Crawford, me personally, I think the way that he can win is honestly to not only use that aggression of Errol Spence against him, but to also bring the fight to Errol. I mean, look, we saw Errol when he got in some of his fights with Sean Porter, for example, with Danny Garcia, opponents who were not just going to sit there and let Errol just pressure them, and they would bring the fight back to Errol, even though, again, Errol won those fights, and, I don't think Errol was in any danger of losing. But with that said, I mean, those were some of the fights that end up going 12 rounds. So I think if Terence Crawford does that, I think that gives him the best shot to beat Errol. Plus, on top of that, too, with Errol, trying to come in and potentially push the pace, right? You can actually, he can still counter punch and things of that nature, wear Errol down, by body shots, different type of headshots. I think, sticking to the body will probably be Terence Crawford's game plan, though. And then that's what's could wear Errol Spence down to where now, Errol, his defense is not as good. He's dropping his hands, and now he can go upstairs on Errol and that standpoint. Now, with that being said, here's what I think is going to win the fight. This is tough, y'all. This is tough because I like both of these fighters. I mean, I'm dead serious. I like both of these fighters. I mean, when Andre Ward retired, who was my favorite boxer? I mean, Terence Crawford became my favorite. I always liked Errol, and that he came up and was good, and they just had this 1-2. So, I mean, I like both of these guys, but somebody has to lose. So with that being said, I think if it goes to distance, I think I'm going to actually give it to Terence Crawford if it goes to full 12. However, I'm picking Errol Spence Jr. to win this fight via stoppage in the 9th round. I think that with Errol's reach and with him actually, putting that constant pressure on Terence Crawford in a way that no other opponent up to this point has really been able to pressure, Bud Crawford, as he's nicknamed. I think, especially with Errol's size, if he, leans on him, really sticks a jab out there, able to get some good combination shots in, I think at some point that could wear Terence Crawford down. And we've seen Terence Crawford, go deep, so I'm not saying he doesn't have the gas tank. But if you really look at Errol, he's been in deep water a lot of the times in a lot of his fights. And it doesn't mean that he just wasn't heading above his, heading above and way better than the fighters that he fought. But he has gone out there to the deep, in my opinion, a little bit more than Terence Crawford has. So because of that, I think if Errol does that, keeps the pressure, throw those, significantly, which is going to be crucial combinations in this fight, I got Errol Spence winning this fight, again, in the 9th round via stoppage. If it goes 12, I think Terence is going to get him, but I got Errol Spence winning in the 9th. This is going to be a fantastic fight. I can't wait to see it. Let me know in the comments who y'all think is actually going to win this fight. I mean, look, either you can agree with me and think Errol is going to win. Hey, you may think Terence is going to win, and that's okay too. Let me know in the comments what you think. But until next time in the next video, you all take care, stay blessed. I'll talk to you all later. Peace.